and can't?
The main people that normally are live, because we have like a bunch of people that work and stuff and they can't be live, but the main people that are live today are super busy and like, oh crap, I have work, I have personal stuff, and so I'm gonna have a smaller group than usual tonight.
It is what it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the first thing we're talking about is broadside versus short side lighting. And the difference in this, you can see in this picture, on the left, it's broadside, and on the right, it's short side. Short side lighting just means you're lighting the side of the face that is facing the camera. Sometimes it might be the camera is at a little bit of an angle, or the subject might turn towards an angle, a certain angle. And whatever side of their face is towards the camera, that would be the short side. Lighting the short side means lighting the short side means you're lighting the side that's not towards the camera. So it'd be the one on the right. The one on the left is broadside. It's when you're lighting the side that is towards the camera, because it looks more broad. It's showing, the whole face instead of hiding most of the face and only showing you that short little side of her face on the right.
So the broadside would always be facing the camera.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the broadside is when we're looking at her face, her left side looks bigger to us. So that's her broader side for the camera.
Okay.
So if we're lighting that side of her face, like in the left picture, then we're lighting for the broadside. And if we're lighting the other side, the side that looks shorter to us because she's turned that way, then we're lighting the short side of her face.
Cool.
So lighting for the short side can add mystery and drama. It can make your subject look a little thinner, as you can see in this picture. When you light for the short side, like on the right, it makes your subject look a little thinner. They don't look as big because you're not revealing as much of their face, so they don't look as big in camera, and it can make people look skinnier. They say it usually, most of the time that's good, but if you have a really thin person or someone with a really narrow face, you might want to have broadside lighting to make them look bigger, just because if you make them look even skinnier, they might start looking skeletal and it won't look as appealing. Let's see. You can kind of see the difference here. Like every time you do for the short side, when you're lighting the short side, it adds that shadow towards the camera. It adds a bit more depth. Broadside lighting, like on the left here, it makes them a little more flat, but it also makes it a little more happy and upbeat looking. It doesn't look as mysterious or dramatic. So it's used more like sitcoms and stuff like that, but something like a drama, you'll see a lot of short side lighting. And even in a comedy, you'll see a lot of short side lighting, and they'll just fill in those shadows quite heavily. But you'll usually find that the fill side, the side that's not as bright of the face, is towards the camera. So most of the time you'll see that people light for the short side just because it's more appealing, and it just adds that bit of dimension towards the camera instead of making it look flat, so it looks a little more cinematic. You can't do broad and short side lighting if the subject's straight on towards the camera. If they're looking straight at it, it's just going to make their face, you'll still have half of it be a little bit more in shadow, have the fill side and the key side, but it won't be this terminology. It won't be broadside versus short side. This only works when they're not facing the camera directly, when they're at a slight angle. Like if you're filming a dialogue scene where two people are sitting at a table, you'll have them both at an angle, and you'll probably be lighting them from the back side, which is the short side, and have that shadow on the front, no matter how much you fill it in with light. Another thing about it is when you have broadside lighting, the short side, so the broadside is on the right here. When you're lighting the broadside, the short side falls into shadow a lot more, and you can't really see. It kind of blends into the background. But when you're lighting for the short side, like on the left, you still see some detail and some texture within that subject's face. And then it, gradually gets more into the light, and their face doesn't fall off into shadow. So they don't really meld with the background as much. So if you don't want that effect of them kind of blending in with the back, you can always add a backlight or something to separate them and still have the light for the broadside. And that'll stop it from falling completely into shadow and looking like the background. But if you don't want that effect at all, then you always want to go for lighting like on the left, lighting for the short side, lighting away from the camera, whatever side of their face isn't towards the camera. And usually it's just more appealing. Like you can see on the right, it just makes the person look a bit more, I don't know, it just looks a little bit more in depth. You can see a little bit more of his features. And on the left side, the broad lighting, it doesn't look as good. It just looks a little, I don't know what to call it, but it doesn't look as good. You can't really even see the other side of his face, you know? Even though they have that backlight, you can see it in the actual frame, and you can see it on the left side of the right side of his face, which is screen left. That's separating him from the background, but his face still falls pretty heavily into shadow because they're lighting for that broad. They're lighting that cheek on the broad side. And the other one you can still see the details of his chin, his jaw, everything as it fades into the light and gives him a bit more of a 3D look. Bit more depth.
Can I throw some out there?
Yeah, go ahead.
They use this a lot with James Bond, Craig.
Yeah, short side lighting.
Yeah, they do. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Anytime you want to make someone look really attractive, that is usually the way they say to do it, especially in portrait photography. What was that?
Guy, no, I was gonna say it's not interrupting. We're contributing to the conversation. Goodness gracious, not teaching anything. We're discussing what we're learning. I just don't want anyone to feel like uncomfortable that they can't share.
You are teaching, so that's I've never heard of these phrases, and I've been in for 30 years, so that's cool.
No, but it's okay to like contribute as well. Like, I don't know, we're sharing what we're learning more than anything. But yeah, I don't want you to feel like you can't chime in, is all I'm saying. But yeah, they say that this is pretty much one of the most common and most flattering forms of lighting in movies. So
the short lighting.
Yeah, lighting. So almost every movie you'll see some scene with that kind of lighting.
And a bunch of people's photographs. You'll see a lot of like portrait photography or wedding photography.
They say especially more dramatic. Yeah, more dramatic videos or photography and stuff like that.
And as you can see in this photo as well, I'd like to point out, like, you don't have to have your subject looking like completely to the side, like in some of these other photos. You can see most of this guy's face. Most of it's lit up. It even goes all the way to like this cheek. There's only a little bit that's in shadow. But since he's turned that way, that still is considered short lighting because we can't really see this side of his face. On his left side of his face, on screen right, that cheek is that cheek isn't shown to us, so that side of his face looks shorter to us. And so since they're lighting from that side, even though it's lighting up his whole face, that's still short lighting, and it's still adding that three-dimensional depth to what he looks like, making him look like you said, like James Bond, any kind of like hero or villain. They always like give him this kind of lighting to give him that depth and give him that kind of look. Broad lighting also can add more depth than if you're lighting a subject straight on. As you can see, there's some shadow, there's some fall off, like on this left picture. So it does add more depth than if you just lit him from the front. Like if you're lighting from where the camera is, that's going to make people look the most flat. So it does add more depth than that, but it doesn't add as much depth as short lighting, like you can see on the right. And for most people, they just think it looks more visually interesting. The one on the left, short lighting, one on the right is broad lighting. It just makes the person kind of, I don't know, like it gives them more, like it hides a bit more of their facial features that you don't want really seen, like some of the blemishes or pimples or something you might see in somebody's face. And it also just gives them a bit more of a three-dimensional look.
Makes them look thinner too. I told my husband this is wonderful. Now he finally knows how to take my picture.
Yeah. And you can do as much as you want. You can do it like completely in shadow like this, where both sides of his face fall into shadow. The shadow and the background blend in that right side, even though this is short side lighting. It does add a bit of mystery, but it doesn't have to be as contrasted as this. You can have the shadows as bright or as dark as you want and still get the same effect. It's just about which side of the face you're lighting. And like I said earlier, like he's mostly facing straight on to the camera, but he is turned slightly to the side. And that's why you can see the differences, and just taking the light from one side to the other creates a huge difference in how he'll look, even though it's the same guy, same outfit, everything's the same. All they're doing is just taking the light from the left side, moving it to the right side, and lighting that other side of his face. See it a lot in TV shows whenever they're looking one way or the other. Most of the time you'll see them lighting from the short side like this. But occasionally you'll see them right from the broad side as well, like this. So there's no real rule or reason to it. It's just whatever you think is the best for the scene. Broad lighting can be beautiful just like anything else. It's just the showing the difference and just moving a light, how different you can make something look. Which one were you meaning, V? You talking about in this one? V said the screen right looks younger, especially in forehead area. Yeah, that's true too. It can make people look younger because it kind of smooths over all those blemishes and anything like the wrinkles and stuff. And so it kind of smooths out the skin and hides the rest in shadow. But another thing about broad lighting is because it goes into shadow so harshly on the short side, since you're lighting from the broad side, the short side's going to fall off almost completely into shadow. If somebody has something on their face that they want hidden, like a big mole on their left cheek or something like that, you can always light them from the right side, and even if it's the broad side, and that'll hide that mole because it'll fall off completely into shadow. Or even if it's not in shadow, it'll still be turned away from camera, so it won't be as noticeable and can even be hidden just from them turning their face a little. So that's also something to think about. Because video and filming is just like videography and filming is just like an extension of photography. And in photography, you're always trying to make the person look the best. But in filming, it's all about the story. So it's about, do we want this person to look young? Do we want him to look old? Do we want him to look mad? Do we want to give him that, that mystery? Do we want to give him that 3D look? And most of the time you want to give them some depth and you want to make them look good. But, according to the story, sometimes you might want to make them look evil or, something like that. So it depends on what your story is, what you want to do. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Oh, that's true too. Like V said, under the eyes too a bit, because the one on the left, he looks kind of tired. You can kind of see a little bit more of his like darker circles under his eyes just from how it's lit. And then because of the right side, it's kind of blending that into the rest of his face, and we're not really noticing it on his our screen left. Because of the shadow, we're not really noticing as much of it. But because the light's coming from his right on the left side of our screen, we can notice those the darker parts of his face a lot more. You can see like the differences. So he looks tired and old, V says. Yeah, does anyone have any questions or comments? All right. So that's that. And then, yeah, so today's meeting shouldn't be too long. Now we're just going to go into some audio recording tips and techniques. This is just some stuff that was in like some of the videos and some of the websites that we were looking at. A lot of this stuff is kind of what we already went over. In past meetings, we kind of like hit one of these or the other, but some of these might be new. So for dialogue and normal talking, remember this is important because of, most of what we're doing when we're filming scenes in a movie is filming for the dialogue. We're not really filming for anything else. All the rest of the stuff is recorded later or created later digitally, for sound effects and things like that. Foley work and all that is done post-production. So when we're on set, we're filming for dialogue for the most part. What was that? Okay. Dialogue and normal talking, you want to record at around -12 decibels to have leeway if you get louder. If they get louder, laugh, clap, or etc. That way it doesn't get to 0 dB decibels and distort. Because if you are recording, you don't want it to get to 0 or above, or it's going to distort and sound terrible. So -12 to -10 is around that area. You want to keep the regular audio, the regular dialogue when they're normally talking. That way, if they do get louder, it doesn't go all the way up to 0. It goes to like -6, -7, and then you're still good, and it's not going to make it clip and sound distorted and ugly.
With digital, as long as you keep it below the reds, you can pump it up later in post. But the
Yes,
moment
that
that you
too.
distort it, it's gone. There's no way to bring it back.
Yes. And even in post, you can't bring it over 0. You can bring it almost up to 0 and it doesn't matter. But if it goes over 0 at any point, it's still going to clip in post-production in your edit. So if you have it and you're recording it on set, you definitely don't want it to get clipped. But then in editing, you also want to be sure that if you are going to up the gain and make it louder, that no part of that audio gets above or to 0. Because if they do get louder at some point, that needs to not go up above 0 either. But yeah, most people had said that well, not most people, but a few people were saying that they had taken the audio, recorded it at -12 to -10, and then, it might have peaked at around -6. And so then they brought up almost all the audio to around -3 or -4, and then had that peak at like -2, just so they could get it as loud as possible without it going over 0. So thanks for that. That's a good tip. But yeah, you never want to get it on set clipping or sounding bad, because it's basically impossible to fix because the information just won't be there. If it's windy, always remember your lav mics, your lapel mics, the ones that hook onto people's clothes and are right next to them. They are going to pick up less wind noise than a shotgun mic. But shotgun mics, you can also have a lot of wind protection. So there are ways to get around it. It just might take away some of those higher frequencies. So a lav mic might be better. And of course, if you have the option, try to use both, because then you have more options to work with in case one doesn't work in post and another one will. If you're using a device that goes directly to your camera, try to boost the levels through that device first instead of boosting through the camera, because cameras don't have good preamps. So we had those field recorders, like the Zoom H4n that I have. That's a separate recorder. It records it separately from the camera. But there's also some that plug directly into the camera, and they're kind of like the same. They're like a recorder, but they plug directly into the camera. And they just say use the boost and the functions on that device first if you have it, before you use any functions on the camera. It's better to turn down the gain on the camera and turn it up on your device than it is to try to boost it in the camera, because the camera doesn't have as good of a preamp and it doesn't sound as good as the device that you're plugging into your camera.
Can I throw something in?
Yeah.
On this one, if you have a sound mixer, even if it's a portable one, most of them have a tone generator that you zero out. What the audio guys I've worked with, they zero out what's on their mixer, and then they go up to the camera. they zero that and bring it down about 3 dB. And that
Okay.
way you're watching what's on the mixer, and you can adjust a little bit as you go along. But you know, as long as it's not popping on your mixer, you're fine on the final record.
Nice.
So, and the other thing you can do with your lavs is a lot of times you get rustling from the shirts. What I used to do is I used to have foam with me, and I would take the foam, move it off of the shirt like that, and then hide my microphone just between the shirt and the foam. So I'd hide it in here. It's not rustling against the foam. It's not rustling against the shirt, and I'm getting good audio, but you can't really tell, except for I'm coming directly down with lighting, that there's a bulge here from the foam. So sometimes that works, and play around with that a little bit.
Nice. I've also heard that people use gaffer tape or medical tape and can tape it like to somebody's body, or they hide it in somebody's hair or a wig if they're wearing a wig. With lapel mics, because they're omnidirectional, you can try to hide them in multiple places as long as they're pretty close to the mouth and they still pick it up pretty good. But underneath, they say, is the best, just because, like around the chest area, just because you could pick up all that reverb coming from the throat.
Also,
But
if it's a guy, I'm sorry, you bring the cable up the back, tape it underneath the collar, and then tuck it. There are usually clips that go like that, spears, and you can clip it onto the collar, and then it will be right by the throat. Gets a little bit of the deep chest, and the cable is hidden behind if you need to do that.
nice. And then you always want to use good headphones when you're monitoring the sound, even if it's just for a test. Use headphones because they're gonna show you exactly what's being recorded from the mic and not show you all the surrounding noises that you're hearing with your ears. So you want to have good headphones, closed back headphones that kind of isolate the sound so that you're not hearing the surrounding area. You're just hearing what's coming from the mic itself. You always want to test your sound equipment and levels before shooting. That means we'll have less cuts and takes, the better. So always try to get it right before you start. And if you have a sound person, a sound recorder, or a boom operator, or whoever on your set, just make sure that they are testing out everything and making sure they're like getting their levels right before you even start, so that they're not having to tell you they need to work on it after the take's done. And now you just realize that take isn't usable. Never forget your room tone or your ambience if you're outside. That's going to come in handy, especially if you're the one editing it, or if you're sending it off to be edited by somebody else. You always want that room tone so you can match that audio or get it as close to it as possible. Or you want that ambience so you can make it sound similar. So in case there was this random popping noise, you can always overlay that, cut it out, and there won't just be a random noiseless part. It'll still have that background noise that's in the rest of your file, and it'll still sound like it belongs with the rest, even if it's a different take or in a different place. Especially if you're using ADR, you're recording later because you couldn't get it on set, but you still want that ambient noise, or you still want that room tone, so that it matches. Then you need to have those files, you need to have that noise. You don't want to go into your files later and try to find it in between takes and all that, because it just takes so long and you might not even have it. So just 30 seconds to 60 seconds of recording that room tone with each different scene or each different take, not take, but each different area that you're in, will really come in handy when you're editing. Remember, like we were saying, remember, getting good audio on set is key, because it's very difficult to get good audio by messing with bad audio in post-production. If you're getting bad audio on set, it's going to be extremely hard, if not impossible, to fix it in post. Audio isn't really that fixable. So once it's bad, it's really hard to get right. Really expensive too, if you have to hire somebody to try to get it for you. Try to get your mics closer to your subjects, because that gets better quality audio, especially with cheaper mics. They can't reach as far. Even shotgun mics, most of those can reach pretty far, but the cheaper ones, they can't reach as far as the more expensive ones or the more professional ones. So you just want to try to get them pretty close in on your subject to get the best quality audio you can. If you're trying to record from the camera's perspective, you can do that, but I would suggest just trying to record from both if you're able. That way you have both options. But yeah, if you just want to record from the camera's perspective, that's something that's a choice you can make. But
And of
just
course,
recording closer is going to
always,
make it sound a little more quality audio. What?
and of course, always remembering that we're not saying, oh, you need to buy the more expensive option. Go ahead and buy. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying that equipment is different types of equipment, different qualities of equipment do different things. Just because it's the most expensive doesn't necessarily guarantee it's going to give you that amazing result either. So always do your research.
Right.
Just
You need to
always
know
like
how to
reiterate
use it, if
that.
nothing else. If you know how to use it, then you can upgrade and then you know what you're looking for. But if you don't even know what you're looking for, there's no point in having good equipment because it's not going to do anything.
And
Not gonna make
you
it
don't
better.
always need to upgrade right away. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, the equipment you have is fine. And then the more you get different kinds of work or more kinds of work or like different demands, then you upgrade. Focus on honing your craft and being good at what you do and getting better before you focus, oh my gosh, I won't be able to get work or do work until I have this equipment and that equipment.
That actually leads into my next one, which was know the limitations of your equipment so you can come up with creative ways to work around it. Someone was asking us how to record with like a really cheap mic. I think it was Shan. And you can, and it can still pick up pretty good audio. You just have to know what it's not going to be able to do. It's going to have some limitations. The cheaper you go, it's going to have more limitations. But it can still get something pretty good if you use it right, if you know how to use it, if you know what it's capable of. So always know what your equipment can do, and then you can always figure out how to change the scene around or where to put the mic or figure out a creative way to work around the problem of it not being in a super expensive mic. So you can still use the cheaper ones, and it doesn't mean it's going to sound terrible. It just means that you need to know how they work and work around if any limitations that they might have. Even with more expensive ones, they're all going to have some kind of limitation. So you just need to know your equipment. Another thing is practice, record tests, see what sounds good and what doesn't, and always test your equipment so that you can know how it works and how you like it. Another thing is when you're recording in a room or anywhere, just turn off anything that doesn't need to be on. Every device is going to create some kind of noise, no matter how subtle. Even certain lights will create a certain buzz. If you're pointing your mic directly at it, you'll start to hear it. So anything that doesn't need to be on, turn it off. If it's the air conditioning, try to get it cold before you start shooting, but once you start shooting, turn that air conditioning off so it doesn't turn on in the middle of your shoot and make a lot of noise and ruin your take. It might be a little hot, but it's still better than, the whole day not having good audio or having some weird random noise in it. Same thing with like refrigerators or different appliances, different, like I said, lights that don't need to be on, or if you're using a fog machine or something like that, use it and then try to turn it off before you start shooting so that it's not making that noise, because those can be very noisy. And anything like that, any kind of appliance or anything like that, you want to always turn it off if you can, if you don't need it.
The other thing for you guys is that sometimes you'll hear a 30 cycle hum. What that is that you're running an XLR next to an extension cord. It can be a 110 to a light. And if you hear a hum, check to make sure that they're at least 6 to 8 inches apart. And if you need to cross them, don't cross them at this type of angle. Cross them at a 90 degree. And I've actually had to lift them up off of extension cords to run my XLRs across the extension cord. So lift it up, get more separation. And it will drive you crazy. 60 cycle hum. I can't even describe what it sounds like. The other thing is,
okay, so a cord from like a light or an extension cord that's plugged into the rest of your equipment is going to make a noise if it's touching your XLR cable.
Doesn't even have to touch it. It can be like 3 inches, 2 inches away. And if they're not well insulated cables, it can make a little like that. Yeah, it's almost a sound like
Okay. Dang. I
that.
didn't even know that. Dang.
The other thing to be aware of with when you're running these is that you want to make sure that number one, you cross that way. And there was something else I want to bring up, but I forgot what it was. Hey, I'm old. Forget your memory.
If you remember, just cut me off and let me know. Oh, the other thing is put your phones in airplane mode and silence them. This goes for all talent and crew.
Sometimes that doesn't work because the frequency on your phone will affect your wireless microphones. So literally on a set, you should turn them off.
Okay.
Because that's what I want to mention. Yeah, it can have the same frequency or it can be close enough that it's causing a little bit of a buzz as you're, even if it's on silent.
What if it's on airplane mode, would it still cause it?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, if either way you want to just be safe, turning it off completely would probably just be the best bet.
Right.
Is it not just, because people will sometimes silence them, sometimes they'll even forget to do that. And that'll ruin the take completely. But even if you just, like you said, even if you just silence them, it still receives in some kind of location data, and it still has different. What?
I was going to touch in on that. Actually, yeah, I have heard of a lot of sets where they asked you to completely turn off your phone for multiple reasons, but I don't know if that's one of them. The newer equipment might be able to handle it more, but it's also because now some Wi-Fi's, like you can have the Wi-Fi, for example, on with your airplane mode on. So you're still receiving notifications, and sometimes you forget to silence them, or even if they're on vibrate, they're vibrating all the time. So yeah, there's also that even with airplane mode on now, you have Wi-Fi signals that still work. So
Right.
when back in the day they didn't. So.
Well, it's safer just to shut them off because it's if you get a text, you're not going to look at it while you're shooting or while you're acting or while you're running audio.
Right.
And the grips who are around might have that ability, but it can wait, and if it can't wait, go find a new set to go work on.
Yeah. Yep. So just try to get everybody to turn off their phones and make sure you turn off yours. Another thing is when you're recording audio, it's always good to limit hard surfaces in the area you record in to reduce echo and reverb. Sounds bounce off the walls and everything. So the harder the surface, the more it's going to bounce off and come back and cause a weird echoey sound in your device, because it'll be hearing it from the source and then hearing it come back off the wall. So you always want to try to limit those surfaces, any hard floors, any hard walls or metal or anything, like it's all going to like have a weird sound that's going to come back and get into your mic again. So you always want to try to limit those if you can. Any kind of foam or something, or even just like a blanket or whatever you can put up to make it, as long as it doesn't have to be in the scene, of course. But if it has to be in the scene, you just kind of want to be aware of it, at least, if nothing else. But surrounding area, you want to try to like make it as limit the amount of sound that's going to bounce off those walls as possible by putting up material that's going to soak it in or block it instead of reflecting it right back at you.
Last year we did a show with Billy Bush, and he was a guest speaker, but then he had to do a voiceover later, and we went up into his room at the hotel, and we just got 8 or 9 pillows and literally put the microphone in the middle of the pillows, and he put his script up in front of the pillows and just read into the pillows. But all that pillow just absorbed all that extra. So it's really a flat sound.
And just to get that, just to soak in that sound so it doesn't reflect back into the mic.
Right, correct.
That's cool. And see, so you just want to use anything you can at your disposal. It doesn't have to look professional. It doesn't have to look amazing. You don't have to have this crazy expensive sound dampening material or whatever. You can just have pillows or a blanket or something like that. As long as you're getting what you need, don't worry about how ugly it is or how cheap it looks or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting the final product the best you can. The other tip is record audio separately into a recorder if you have the means and the ability. It's just going to always turn out better than if you have it going directly to the camera, because the camera doesn't have, they're not as focused on sound and everything. They don't have the wiring and all of that for the best sound. They don't have the best preamps, like we said earlier. So record the audio separately into a field recorder if you can afford it, and you have like a crew that can help you. If you have to put it into the camera, then just try to get one of those devices that can plug directly into your camera but still mess with it, a mixer, or I think it's a field recorder still, but it goes just to your camera instead of going to its own device. So you can still have something like that to where it'll be a little bit better than your camera, but the best way to do it is just to have it separate, have it on a separate device that's dedicated to sound, because it's just going to make it sound better. But if you are doing separate audio, the thing is, in editing, you're not going to have the audio and video together, which is why you'll need something like a clapper board to make that loud noise at the beginning so you can sync the audio with the video later. So just make sure that if you are recording your audio separately onto a separate device than your video, you are using a device, or if you don't have something like a clapper board, you at least make a hand clap. Just making a noise like really loud and really quick will allow you to sync it in post. So just remember that, because if you don't have that, it's a lot harder to get it in the lineup. There's something called, I'm actually gonna look at this.
Real quickly, there's one other thing you can do, which if there's a clock with a second hand.
What was it?
If there's a clock with a second hand, a big clock on a second hand with a wall, you can go up to the clock and count down on the clock too. Have your talent 3, 2, 1, and so when it hits the 5 or the 4, you know he or she are speaking with the movement of the clock, and that will allow the editor to also get a real good guesstimate on where to be.
Oh, nice.
Visually and also audio.
All right, so if you don't have the clapper board and you don't have something like that, you can use a clock and have somebody
Count it
watching
down.
it.
Yeah, and count with the seconds.
Okay, cool.
That way the editor can follow it. It happened, yeah, when our gear didn't show up one time, and the producer didn't want people clapping. Who knows why? So we came up with that.
Gotcha.
The editor, it worked.
Nice. There's also these things, well, this is something else, but this is for if you're trying to, if there are hard floors, every kind of footstep is going to make a noise, and you don't want those in your actual recording. You want to add those later. That's usually what Foley work is for. They make the sounds of the heels, or they make the sounds of whatever kind of shoe it is, so that they can put those in as the sound effects. And in the actual recording, you're focused on dialogue. You're focused on the people speaking. So there's these things called hush heels, which I found interesting. If you have a hard floor, you're not able to cover it. Maybe the hard floor is in the actual shot. Then there's these things that can go on the bottom of people's shoes called hush heels that you can just kind of I don't know if you tape them up there. They're probably like a sticky on the other side, and you just put them on their shoe. And that way it doesn't make as much noise because they're stepping on these little cushions instead of their shoe hitting that hard floor, making that loud footstep. I thought that was really cool. There are noisy props and elements of a scene. See if they're really needed or not, especially during close-ups when you're honing in on the subject. Like, for instance, the guy used an example of a wide shot where the family's eating dinner, and so they're they're cutting their food, and they're eating, and they're hitting the plate with the utensils and the fork and the knife, and they're all making these scraping noises and all that. But for the close-up, they want to get that clean audio. They want to get that dialogue really crisp and clear. So if they can just mime doing that instead of actually hitting the plate with their utensils to make that noise, if they can just pretend like they're doing that instead, since you're doing a close-up and you're not seeing the utensils, they don't actually have to hit the plate with them. But they did add that, you know, if the actor's saying that they can't do that, that they need it to get into character or for whatever reason, they're gonna win. And so just let them. But if you can get them to just mime it instead, if they don't need to actually be doing it, it's better for sound because you're gonna get a nice, cleaner audio file that has just their dialogue and not all those extra noises that it's gonna be harder to take out or change. Because like I said, those are usually added in post-production. Or, you know, you get a wild track of them later and then try to add them into the scene if you're not going to do any Foley work. Always remember your mic's polar pattern or pickup pattern, aka pickup pattern on the mics, because shotgun mics, they're very directional. You can see in the bottom right, they pick up a tiny bit from behind them. They pick up the same amount from the side so that it actually cancels each other out. So they don't really pick up any noise from the sides. Maybe a tiny bit, but not too, like that's where they're trying to negate all the sound because they want to be directional, and they pick up most of their sound from in front. So if you're not on axis, if you're not pointing that, whoever's using the mic, the boom operator, or if you're setting it up on a stand, if it's not pointing directly toward the source, it might not be on axis and it might sound a little muffled, or it might sound even worse. It might just sound like, it might be a little quieter, and that's the best thing. But if it sounds muffled, that's going to sound even worse, and it's going to be hard to make it sound nice and good. So you always want to make sure you're pointing the mic directly at the source so that it's on axis. And you want to know all your polar pickup patterns because you want to know what your mic's going to do. Some mics, like you can see in this picture right here, like this one, there was a mic that somebody was showing that had, you're not usually going to use this kind on set if you're shooting for, you know, on location. But let's say you're doing dialogue or you're doing something narration, you might use a mic more like this that has that figure 8 pickup pattern, or what is it called? I don't remember. It's bi-directional, so it picks up from both sides. But the mic has to be pointed up like this so that it can pick up from that side and the other. There's mics that have these little grates on them all across the entire thing, but they still only pick up from the front and the back. And they say, you know, sometimes people will put them kind of like this on this side, looking towards the person speaking, when really they need to be standing up like this to pick up the vocals from, you know, how that mic picks up sound. So not all mics are the same. As you can see, this one picks up from the front, doesn't really pick up anything from the back. This one will pick up from both sides. Some mics only pick up from one side and they have grates on both. So you just need to know what your mic's going to do and where it picks up vocals from so you can get the best out of it. When you're on set, you'll have lavalier mics that use this omnidirectional polar pattern. It's picking up equally in all directions. And then you'll usually have like a shotgun mic on a boom pole that picks up very directional sound. But if you're using those mics, you just want to be sure you know how far it can reach and what sounds the best and where. And if you're using a shotgun mic, you really want to test out your mic and see, you know, have somebody speak and then just barely move it to the right and to the left. See how quickly that sound falls off and makes them sound not as good, because some mics are very extremely directional and they're going to drop off really quickly and you're not going to be able to hear them as well, even if you're just a few inches to the right or left. So you want to always try to see what it's capable of so you have some leeway. If you can't constantly point it at their mouth or their throat or whatever, you want to be able to, you know, see what you're able to do and how close you have to keep it to that, to pointing at their throat without it causing it to sound worse. You also want to be aware of like stuff behind the subject or a noisy environment. If you're using a shotgun mic, since it's only picking up sound from the front, a good way to block sound that's coming from behind them. Maybe there's like a construction thing going on behind them and you don't want to pick it up, but you have to get sound on set. then you could always point it like almost 90 degrees directly down at the subject that you're trying to capture sound from. That way it's only capturing sound from the ground, from right in front of it, and it's not going to capture sound from its sides, which would be behind or in front of that subject you're trying to capture sound from. So there's different ways you can do it. There's also, if there's a lot of sound coming from the ground for whatever reason, you can try to point the mic up at the person and it'll pick up sound. It might not sound exactly like we would hear it usually, but it'll still sound better than hearing all that background noise that's on the ground. So just know that you can, mess with your mics and angle them differently. But if you're using anything, especially mics for like narration and voiceover and things like that, you just want to know how your mic works so that you know where to point it to get the best audio from it, because they have different polar patterns and it's going to pick up sound in different ways.
If you're running audio, also make sure that you know what the shot is. So if you're doing a bus shot and suddenly the refrigerator goes on, you know that you can come underneath and you go four buttons from the top in this shot and get good audio. So you're able to kind of know where the shots are. Also, try to make some type of
No, go ahead, finish.
with the camera up. And if you're running the E&G style, because that way, if he or she are running the camera, they can go, a quick, you're good, little up, little down. It communicates with the crew on where you are in space.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was like a big tip that he gave, was go through the script when you're a sound guy, see the scenes, see what you're gonna need for them. And one of the things that they actually, some of them really kind of were not complaining, but just like frustrated about, was the fact that not every director, not every cinematographer will take the sound guy with them when going to locations or location scouting, or like going to the final location to check it out, because that can be very important for someone working with sound to know what location he's working with, to be able to scope out the location and see where he can put his equipment and what it's going to look like and all that kind of stuff. And that is a tip for anyone that is going to be like a director or a cinematographer out there. Like, take your sound guy with you when you're going to the location first, or checking out the location, or location scouting, because that can be really helpful and useful for them.
Also, when you're scouting, number one, you brought up a great point, which was they don't know where to put their gear. I can't tell you how many times that we've been someplace and the sound tech, no fault of themselves, or the LD will put their equipment where our next scene is going to be. So in the next 5 minutes, everything has to be moved, be set up so that way we can start to set for our shot. Also, when you do site survey, we did this with IBM way back when. We had an interview with the CEO. Went up there the Tuesday before. Perfect view, perfect sound. It was looking great. Went there to go shoot. They were cutting the lawn outside of his office.
Oh man.
So we had to go have them stop cutting, which was not a big deal, but that took up an hour. And we had nine people on that shoot at about $175 an hour each. So that 1 hour cost us roughly 15. It adds up.
Yeah.
So ask whoever's available what's happening next. Get the name of the person who's going to open up your location for you, and the phone number, and their personal phone number. Because that way, if they're driving to work and they stop there to get a coffee, and you guys are there at the door going, hey, I forgot, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Okay, now we can calm down for 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's definitely a tip we talked about last week a lot, was to, and I reiterated it. It's like, guys, the same way you're looking for a home, the same way you'd be like analyzing a neighborhood you want to live in, analyze the neighborhood you're going to shoot in, check out all hours of the day. Oh, it's quiet at this time, but you never know. It could be rush hour at some point, right when you're about to shoot. Yeah. Or there could be neighbors that don't like noise at a certain point. So just know your location, communicate with the person that is providing your location, keep up to date with them, on track, and gosh, it makes such a huge difference so you don't have any surprises later, you or them.
Definitely. The last thing I was going to add to that is that if you are doing sound or you have somebody doing sound, try to see if you can watch the rehearsal, especially the blocking rehearsal, so you can see where the actors are going to be, where they're going to go, and what they're going to do on set so that you know where you're going to need to be. You can also see like where they're going to say their lines. Okay, so actor 3 says her line when she gets to that corner of the room, and then actor 2 says his line. So then they can know where to be, where to point the mic, especially if the actors are going around and the whole scene is them moving around the whole room. Then they need to know where they're going to be and when they're going to say their lines and where they're going to be when they say their lines so that they can know how to handle it and how best to get that sound and who's the most important in this scene, who's having the biggest amount of dialogue and whatever else. They need to know all these things so they can know where to be and where to have their mic pointed. But that I think was it of all the tips that I had seen that we hadn't gone over too much before. Does anyone have any questions or comments or any extra tips that we didn't add?
No, I don't know too much about this to add to this conversation. Mostly just listening in this area because it's not an area that I know as much in audio stuff.
When you're running a boom mic, a couple of things. One, watch your shadowing. I think we talked about that a couple of days ago. So your shadow from your boom mic doesn't come in and hit somebody in the face. The other thing is if there's a step ladder or something nearby, it helps you to be able to get a step ladder. The other thing is use your shoulders to rest the mic on your boom. So now you're not holding like this the whole time. You're coming down like this. And having a ladder or something to stand on helps you get that extra height so you can tilt down off your shoulders. I've seen, the guys who did sound for me for years, he on the left, he's just kind of resting on his shoulder, still getting good audio, but now he can also lift it up and move it in. One last thing that I'm going to take off is that there's a cable runs down from the microphone down the boom and up. Sometimes if you're moving it, that microphone will hear a little ting. It's the cable hitting the boom. So you want to make sure that that's nice and snug and taped against the boom so you can extend it and still bring it back. But if you hear a little ting, look for that cable hitting the mic boom.
Or any kind of scraping and stuff like that too. I've heard like whenever I've had this where how they have and like in this picture, they have it wrapped around the pole. That's usually how you want it. Get it nice and snug, like you said.
Yep.
If you have somebody who's new to it, or if you're doing it and you're kind of new to it, make sure you do that, because if you don't, that cable does wag around everywhere. It scrapes against that pole, and that makes kind of like it makes some kind of noise inside the mic, or like you said, it hits against it and makes that pinging noise because it's constantly whacking it back and forth. That's where your sound's traveling through, so you don't want that thing going all over the place anyway. You want to keep it as safe as possible, and if you get it snug, it's really easier to handle and not have it go everywhere. And it's easier for you to handle as well. It's not just about the sound. It's also about it's not going to be tripping you up and getting in your face and everything like that. So
right,
definitely want to try to get that snug against the pole, either wrapping it around or just like he said, taping it or using something to get it to not be loose.
What are those things that women use in their hair? It has two balls and elastic.
The scrunchies?
No, they're not the scrunchies, but they're old fat. You can get them at the dollar store up here. They're
hair tie.
Yeah, but they're two balls with an elastic in the middle. You can wrap that around and then put it through itself, and that will hold it in place. And it's quick and easy to release.
Oh, cool.
And they cost $1 for 12. I'm going to bed.
All right. Thanks for coming today.
All right, good night. Thanks for
Sounds
coming.
good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
What did he say? What is that? What for? I missed what the item was named. What was the name of the item?
They're like little. They have two balls at the end with a elastic in the middle, and women used to use them. Or little girls used to use them to tie their hair up. And
like hair curlers.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Those things. Yeah.
Yeah, and you just curl it wrap it right around the pole and put the ball through the loop and it holds it tight.
And where do you
Nice.
put that on the pole to hold?
It's to
Right
hold the
on.
cable from the, you see the cable on the, right here in the picture?
Yeah.
So it's to hold something like that, like to clamp it down.
Oh, I got you because they clamp. Oh, I see what you mean. You could put something inside it, wrap it, clamp it on, and it would hold the cable to the pole.
Right.
That makes sense. I understand what you're saying. I got you.
I leave at 5 to go to work. Good night.
All right, good night. Thanks, Nat.
Thank you.
All right, that was everything for today, guys. Just wanted to show. So for, like I said, Tuesday is going to be our next meeting, Tuesday, October 12th. We're not having a meeting on Monday. So just keep that in mind. It's going to be moved to Tuesday. And Tuesday, we're going to go over everybody's clean audio exercise. We're going to watch that, give some feedback, show our own, everything like that. And we're also going to be talking about a lighting technician and what
For
they
the
do.
clean audio, does it matter what we record on? Should I be recording on my phone or an audio equipment or
If you
like-
have audio equipment, I would use that. But if you just have a phone, that's fine too. It's just
Okay.
trying to get whatever we have available each.
Okay.
We just do that. I would, if you were using your phone, I would just look up on like YouTube how to get good audio out of your phone, something like that. And I'm sure there's plenty of explanations on it.
Cool.
All right. Oh, and then the last thing I wanted to say is we started talking about the short film pre-production. We're going to probably be starting that next week. And we'll update anyone who's involved with any production meetings that we're going to have upcoming, and as well as distribute the job roles and like confirm everything. We'll be
Sounds
doing
great.
that
Yeah,
next
I'm
week.
really looking forward to hearing more about that, and of course, still enjoy all of these classes and everything going on for the most part. Yeah, looks
Yeah.
pretty good. I hope you guys are well. I haven't even checked in with you guys.
Yeah, we're doing well, and we're looking forward to it. It's looking more, it's feeling more real the closer it gets, and the more we like start doing it. You know.
Yeah, no, it's exciting to do that short, to do more shorts, and like learning more. It kind of opens the door. I mean, more doors anyway, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So
It's
it's all
like
fun.
improving all our skills and everything.
Yeah, improving all the skills, just getting more better at the skills that you already have, raising the bar, and maintaining, industry contacts, relationships with people and people that grow in the industry. It's fun because you start to realize that you see the same faces all the time on different productions. So it's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording right there.